Hi there, I'm Logan Medish, your host, and my guest today has made it one of his life's missions to eliminate the phrase Khyber Pass firearms from our lexicon. Hope you enjoy the show. My guest on today's episode of the High Caliber History Podcast is Miles Vining. He is the co-founder of Silah Report in 2017, which was founded due to an observed knowledge gap in the small arms research field when it came to understanding numerous aspects of small arms and light weapons in the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asian regions around the world. Miles, welcome to the High Caliber History Podcast.
Hey, Logan, what's up? What's happening, man?
Hey, yeah, good to hear from you. I know you're all over the place, literally all over the world a lot. So it's good that we've got some time to sit down and chat about some things. So let's get right into this. Where did your desire for arms research come from? I mean, obviously we mentioned that you observed a knowledge gap, but it takes a certain type of person to actively dive deep into the content and do the research. So where did your desire for arms research come from?
Well, in my interest in small arms began at an early age as a child, interested in guns and ammo and stuff like that. And it kind of growing up, I was always fascinated by different things. I think it really kicked off in Burma when I grew up there as a child, and I would see all these guard posts around the city, and I would go to them, and I'd make it a little game as a teenager, and I would try to see their M16 or their M1 carbine or their SKS, and I would try to get their serial numbers, or I would try to take pictures of the rifles and stuff like that. And it became this little competition. It's like, how far could I push it? Could I get a guard to show me his gun? Could I get him to disassemble it? Could I be the one disassembling it? Could I take pictures of it? And it was kind of, looking back on it now, it was kind of like, it's kind of like the basis of what we do today. But back then, it was really just a game to me to see how much I could do with it. And it was,
right.
As a teenager, you're learning about, what's an M16 and what's an M1 carbine. And you're presented with these questions of how did an M1 carbine get into Yangon, Burma? What's an Italian TZ-45 doing in Yangon, Burma? And you're figuring this stuff out. And that leads into Silah Report, because it sort of gets into the questions of, there's the technical side of finding out what these guns are and technically exactly what model and variant and production year they are. And then there is the more geopolitical side and the historical puzzle piece of, well, how did this gun get here? And I was just saying this, yesterday, talking with a buddy. But I mean, firearms are things that we can hold. You can actually pick up an M1 carbine and disassemble it, and you can actually feel it. You can actually shoot it if you want to, right? I mean, you can't. It's hard to do that with a Sherman tank, or it's hard to do that with. Right. And I mean, it's like, you can't pick up a Tiger tank in your hands and be like, holy crap, this was this German masterpiece from the Second World War that, could have helped turn the tide against the Allies. And it's like, you can't do that. You can go to a museum,
right,
observe it. You can see it in pictures. If you're rich enough, I'm sure you could buy a Tiger tank, but you can't hold it in your hands. Firearms
right.
are like tangible historical objects that are, we can actually pick these up and be like, man, this is what it was like to hold this. It doesn't 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it doesn't matter. So, and that's part of the technical aspect of, of an interest in firearms that comes with it.
Sure. Yeah. We're not all fortunate enough to be Alan Coors or Reed Knight and have our own personal tank collection, but wouldn't that be nice? But it brings me back, because I think it's fascinating. You were talking about growing up in Burma and taking pictures of the weapons and stuff like that, and I still do that. I was in France a year ago and was taking pictures of the police and the guards outside, the Palace of Versailles and in front of the Louvre and all that stuff. And they're giving me side eye, as I'm trying to get closer to get better pictures and stuff. And that's just that's funny. You're like, yeah, I was doing that as a kid. And I'm like, I still do that. So growing up in Burma, what was that like?
It wasn't the sort of most exotic thing in the world. I mean, it's a military dictatorship, and I went to an international school, so I wasn't totally I wasn't living in a hut, running around in the jungle with Mowgli as my buddy kind of thing.
Right.
But it was a very I was blessed with that experience because it really just showed me how another part of the world worked in terms of how bad some countries can have it in terms of political speaking, in terms of like being in a military dictatorship, and
Right.
student riots just get shot down, and the monks come out and then they get shot down, and stuff like that happening. But it was really important. It was really key to my interest in small arms because it was almost like a petri dish, like presented in front of me. It's like, no, this is the actual, instead of like reading about, oh, well, these guns were used by these guys and now we can see them in pictures on the internet. It was like, no, this is them one carbine right down the street. That's, this Burmese policeman is actually holding in his hand. It's like it was a very tangible, visceral, like, yeah, no, this is happening. This is history. This is the result of history happening right in front of me, kind of thing. I would say it was very useful in that sense.
That's neat. I don't know that I knew that you lived in Burma, so that's finding out something new every day. um, the next question is: you quite literally have been into museum collections literally all over the world. You and I have talked about different museums and collections that we've been to, and I've seen some of the stuff you've put up in your blog posts and on different sites. And I am super jealous of some of the collections that you've managed to see around the world. So this is probably a hard one, but if you had to pick a favorite museum that you've been in anywhere in the world, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. Hands down, the pattern room. Hands down. Absolutely hands down. The pattern room.
Really?
Yeah. 1,000%. The pattern room, which is now currently known as the National Firearms Center in Leeds, which I think you're just talking to Jonathan Ferguson about, right?
Yep. He's another guest on here as well. Yep.
Yeah. So and I think the pattern room, because it's the only collection with the longest history of purposely adding items to that collection for the reason of, sort of technical firearms study and technical firearms research, because
Right.
and what that produces is it produces a room with samples, with well curated samples of almost everything, right?
Right.
And I mean, we look at other collections, right? I mean, we look at, let's say, the Marine Corps Museum, and we look at, okay, like, well, what was the point of this collection? Well, the Marine Corps Museum's collection really was just the result of the basic school, the officer training school that the Marine Corps had, and was really the result of, they had a bunch of, it really served the basic school as like, these are the examples of enemy guns overseas, like, officers could come in and check them out and stuff. And then someone was like, no, wait, hold on. We need to make we need to put this in a museum collection.
Right.
And then it became that. Or if we look at, maybe the NRA museum, it's like the NRA museum has how long has NRA museum existed for? 100 years?
They've been around since 1935, and that collection was really an outgrowth of the guns that had come in from manufacturers as test samples for American Rifleman magazine, and the companies told them, just keep it. And so eventually they amassed enough of them. Were like, well, this is kind of a museum collection, So it was very accidental. It wasn't, hey, let's set out to create a museum about X and build a collection around it. It was that they had the collection and built the museum around it.
Yeah, and I think all these collections, they sort of it's the same template that they have, but let me say, and like, if you wanna correct me or incorrect me, the NRA museum is really more interested and more focused on sort of the story of small arms, of civilian ownership in the United States. Would that?
Yes.
What's up?
Yes, I would say that's fairly accurate. Their goal, the theme that they say is it's firearms freedom in the American experience is the theme of that, and yeah, they're doing a decent job of telling the whole story of civilian firearms ownership. Also, there is a lot of warfare sprinkled in there as well. But I think the theme that it really comes down to is the civilian ownership, which makes sense given that it's the NRA museum.
Yeah, when the warfare does come involved, it has to do with the American experience, like American soldiers or GIs fighting against Germans in World War One,
Yes,
Two, or
exactly.
Vietnam.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a diorama of the guys in the World War I trenches and and the guys in a blown out building in St. Lo and, in Normandy for D-Day. But yes, it is focused on the American experience. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the reason why I like the Leeds collection, and this is why I say is that like the Leeds collection was essentially part of Britain's intelligence gathering efforts to find out like what is everyone across the world using in terms of small arms and light weapons, right? So it's
Right.
so there isn't that sort of twist of like well it has to be within the British experience or who are our enemies or something like that, but it's like
Right.
what exists out there throughout the entire world. So that's why you have weapons in there, you have small arms in there of areas that have nothing to do with any conflict that Britain is involved in, because it's from that sort of curator's standpoint of we need everything. We need to know what's out there. Like, what are the evolving technologies that are out there? We need one of them. And, they would go out and, Herbie Woodard was the famous curator of the pattern room at Enfield for a while. And, he would go out there and he would it was his job as like a British government employee to be like, I need one of this, one of this. Oh, this is a new thing happening over here. All right, let me get one of those. Oh, this is something happening. Let me get one of those. Oh, this conflict is happening. We need to be aware of what's happening in that conflict. Okay, get me one of the new things from over there. And so you have,
right.
And the reason why you have this awesome collection of all this stuff, and it's like straight from the standpoint of like a technical firearms perspective of we need to know what else is out there, and as a result, that collection is just astounding. It's insane. And
right.
Here's the thing: is it fits the profile, right? If you're interested in sort of firearms technology, it's like that's where you want to be. If you're interested in the firearm and the American historical experience, it's like you need to head over to the NRA museum kind of thing.
Right.
So that's why, I mean, in terms of collections, I think that's why I praise the NFC over anything.
Sure.
In that light, right?
Sure. Yeah, and that's talking about why they collect what they collect, and because they need to know what's going on, and looking at that from my museum background, that's they have a scope of collections, and they know what fits into their scope of collections. Now, granted, they have a very wide scope of collections, but still, they know what their scope is. It's we need to know what's going on in these conflicts, and to have something that relates to it, as opposed to, well, our scope is we collect guns and we just want all the guns, we talked.
There's nothing wrong with having, if someone were to start a museum or a gun collection and be like, my scope is guns and I collect guns. It's like, dude,
exactly.
Props to you, man. Nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. Like I think the closest thing we probably have to that is and I'm sure you've heard of him, is that guy Dragon Man out west who's got his own collection, and he collects guns. He's just got everything because he likes having everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. But from a museum standpoint and a curation standpoint, to literally bring in anything and everything, that's just not sustainable. It's just not doable. It's noble, and I love the idea of we need all the things, but
the gun,
it's like right, like what do you collect? Yes, you know. And that's the dream, right? That's the dream, to go to, like Rock Island Auction Company and buy everything in the catalog from all 3 days, because that's what I collect that catalog. But that would be great. But you got to have a scope of collections, and the pattern room has a scope, broad though it may be, but it has created, like you said, a really remarkable collection. And I'm glad you picked that one, because I know you've been to some really cool, really amazing collections, and that's one that doesn't necessarily get its due. So that's very cool.
Yeah, and it's it's a great collection, man. If there's researchers out there that want it, that are trying to get into it, then you need to try your darndest to get into the patent room. It's worthy of the effort.
Absolutely. It's definitely one of those bucket list things for a gun researcher. So, you've also worked, obviously you've worked with museum collections in what you do, but a lot of what you do also, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of what you do is also dependent on private collectors and providing you access to stuff that just isn't in a museum. And have you found that it's been easier to work with private collectors or work with museums? Because there's kind of pros and cons to both. The private collectors might be a little like, well, why do you want to know what I have? Whereas the museums, it's all right, well, you can come in, but you got to abide by these rules. Or so what's been your experience with working with those two different systems?
Yeah, I think, as you say, there's pros and cons to both. The museums, like the public versus a private museum, like I think it's cooler. It's cooler working with the public museums, because they have that attitude of we're a publicly funded collection. It's like that's actually our mission statement, is to sort of get this stuff out and be open for researchers, and that is like. Right. So refreshing to see that, especially at Springfield Armory, especially at not at at the Marine Corps Museum. It's so refreshing to be among that, of like, we exist for the public. Like the public pays our bills, so we are open up, and that's like really cool to have that sort of attitude. Whereas you're right, yeah, with the private collections, you have so many more restrictions, with collectors being like, well, you can publish this, but don't put my name on it, or, don't do this, or don't have the location or stuff like that, which is darn important for them, because, some of these collectors, it's like they've got like multi-million-dollar collections, and they don't really want people knowing where all the Maxims in the United States are located at this random address in Alabama. It's like they don't really need the rest of the burglars in the U.S. to know that point, so it's like it's not wise to do that.
Right.
And it is a huge element of trust in that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the private collections are like, it's interesting working with collectors, because what you get, you have to know what you're getting, right? And sometimes in a private collector, it's like, the pieces that they have are sometimes not in the best form that they should be, because they result from the sort of commercial experience, right? Whereas if you look at Springfield Armory, okay, like Springfield Armory and the Springfield Army Museum, it's like, yeah, these are the trials guns that were brought over, used in these Springfield Army trials of whatever year and they were brought over from FN or Browning or something. And this is it. Right. They're in their prime condition because they came here for the trials and they stayed here, whereas the private collectors, the guns that they have and the collections that they have, like sometimes they've been like altered because they've been on that commercial market, and because, well, I from this, and they change out the compensator and this, and it's like you're not dealing with the pristine original piece. You're dealing with like the imported, commercialized version of that piece, and you have to realize that, and that's so very important to take into account, especially as like a firearms researcher, where it's like you want to find out what was the original thing, and because everything else is going to be based off of that original thing. And that doesn't help to find like, yeah, this is the piece. This is a FAL. This is an Egyptian FAL variant. This is an Egyptian FN-49 variant. But, you know, it was imported by Sentry, and Sentry added these to their guns to make them legal in the US and da 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 da. And it's like, well, man, this isn't the original. It's like you're always aiming at the original kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. You know, I mean, unless, and there are certainly collectors out there like this that, you know, their thing is collecting safe queens. You know, it's new in box, and, you know, don't turn the cylinder. We don't want a drag line. You know, it's a safe queen. Unless you're that kind of collector, and most collectors, I think, probably aren't. I know I'm not. You know, it's we like these things because we want to take them out and use them. You know, they're guns. They're meant to be shot. You know, and you know, Springfield Armory's got some amazing test guns in their collection from different trials in the early 20th century, and they're amazing pieces. But Alex McKenzie, the curator up there, you're not taking them out and shooting them, you know, over his dead body, and that's where you have a different access with the private collectors. Is that, you know, they're willing to let you take stuff out and shoot it at times once you've built up that relationship of trust, as you had mentioned before.
Yeah. No, absolutely. For sure. Yeah.
So with your study primarily focusing, you know, Central Asia, North Africa, Middle East, there are a lot, I think anyway, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, I think there's probably a lot of misconceptions by people about what it is that you do and why you're focusing on these types of firearms. And you know, you guys hold very true to your region with what you do, and you know, your logos have different language script on them, and in this often untrusting world over here, you know, people see stuff like that, and why you studied a bunch of terrorist guns and things like that, and I'm sure that's probably a huge pet peeve of yours. So what is you know, what's a big misconception that people have about what you're studying over there, and why?
You know, it's really interesting you asked that, because everything that we do involves some level of conception, either misconception or proper conception, or even down to like names. Like, what is something called? It's like, well, this is why we research this stuff, because people don't even know what, like, these things are named half the time. And even in that perception is what you're talking about. Like everyone I run into in the Middle East or in Afghanistan, like they all think I'm a spy. Like that's the conception I'm dealing with over there. And then
that's funny.
And that's something I'll never be able to get away from. It's like, oh, like you're white, you're young, you know, like, you know, a little bit of Arabic and Pashto and Dari. It's like, yeah, fucking spy, CIA spy, like get out of my face, you know. So that's an issue I have to deal with on top of everything else. And then
that's funny, because I would have never that never crossed my mind. But yeah, I guess just because I know you, and I'm like, I don't look at it and be like, Miles Vining, international spy, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So sorry, I go ahead.
But yeah, and I mean, that's another point though, and I wanted to bring this up in talking about collections, because the thing is, in the Middle East and Central Asia, when you talk about, like, small arms are part of the defense industries of a lot of these countries, and the defense industries of these countries are national secrets. It doesn't matter whether you're in, you know, Jordan or Egypt or Iraq. And, you know, if you ask about small arms production, it's like we really have this sort of privileged, leisurely approach to small arms research in the United States and Europe, where we can actually, you know, get into depth about a lot of these small arms, and, you know, to the extent that we have whole industry about, you know, the historical small arms study of historical small arms that doesn't exist in the Middle East. Small arms are an issue of national security. It's as if you were poking around in the U.S. asking about, like, nuke production or something. I don't know. It's a totally different world. I mean, in Egypt, for example, like, I went to all these Egyptian museums. I went to museums in Egypt, in Alexandria, in Cairo, in El Alamein. I went to the Egyptian Air Force Museum. I went to the Egyptian El Alamein Memorial Museum. I went to the Egyptian October 1973 War Museum. And these are all ran by the Egyptian Ministry of Defense. And the whole attitude there, talk about collections. Like, there is no getting into some of these collections at these museums, because the whole museum is set up in a way that it's like, come here, you get the Egyptian Ministry of Defense spiel on what happened at El Alamein, what happened with the history of the Egyptian Air Force, on what happened, in October 1973. You get that spiel, and you go out and you leave, and that's it. There's no idea, there's no concept of, free back and forth discussion and talking about like history and interpretive history and like, well, what happened, and let's break it apart, and what are the different views on this historical event. Well, this guy says A and this guy over here says B, and recent research has come to light that shows that this might have not been the case, and there's none of that. There's the Egyptian Ministry of Defense view on what happened on the October 1973 crossing of the Suez Canal, and that is it. In fact, any other discourse of what happened is actually wrong, categorically wrong, and we are right and you are wrong. Okay, and it's this very diabolical look at that kind of thing, and that goes into some of the nation states within the Middle East and looking at this stuff. And I mean, for example, with my book that was recently published into Helmand with The Walking Dead, where I wrote about my experiences in the Marine Corps Infantry, I have a very close Arab friend in the Middle East who actually ordered it, and he was reading it, and he actually was sending me, he's critiquing it, and he was sending me messages, and he was like, holy crap, you're bad-mouthing officers, like you're saying how all these officers are pieces of crap and stuff in the Marine Corps. And I was like, yeah, well, I have my First Amendment and I have my views of the experience, and some of these guys like got people killed, so I don't feel bad about bad-mouthing some of these people. And he was like, you would never do that in the Middle East. You would never, ever, ever do that, because it's that hierarchy kind of thing. It's like, no, there isn't this free-flowing train of thought, right? So where I want to get back into that and theories of like conception and misconceptions, like trying to get into some of these museums and being like, hey, can I, see can I get some of the guns out from behind glass? Can I see some of this? Can I see some of that? It's like, no, you can't. No, you can see the view that we have of the conflict, and that's it. And that's kind of that, but that's kind of the Middle Eastern side of things, the Arab side of aspects of what we're looking at. And then it's interesting that you asked like, oh, like, what are you doing studying this terrorist language or something? And it's like, I kind of thought there might be some of that criticism when I started Silah Report with Hiracha Hirapet in 2017. I thought there would be some of that. But in reality, it's like, it's like Silah Report just has turned into this natural filter of, the people that have that opinion. They just keep their opinion to themselves, or they just see our stuff and then they just look elsewhere. And then the people that, and it's kind of like like the people that are genuinely interested and genuinely motivated by the stuff that we do, they rise to the top and they get in touch with us, and we hear more opinions from them. And the people that don't disagree or like think have that kind of attitude, it's like, I just don't hear from them, which is great.
Right.
And it's fantastic, because the only people who are contacting us are a lot of times we get people who are like, holy crap, like, I served in Afghanistan, or I served in Iraq, or I was a contractor there, or I'm a historical student in the US, or I'm from the region. It's like, wow, no one else is doing what you're doing. Like, I'm all about that kind of thing. And it's like, cool, man. We'll want to get in touch with those kinds of people. So Absolutely. It's weird. It's like the people who have that, like, that sort of like, kind of thing. It's like, I just don't hear from them. They just, I don't know. I bet they're out there. I just don't hear from them.
Right. Thankfully, they just keep on scrolling, which, like you said, that's a very good thing. And I'm actually surprised to hear that. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that, you guys aren't getting a bunch of flack and they're not, spamming your inboxes with stuff like that. But that gives me a little bit of hope that they're just kind of ignoring what they may not agree with, or in their worldview, and moving on. And I think that the fact that there is so much acceptance of what you guys are doing and trying to understand these small arms, I mean, I think that's fascinating, because The idea that a research organization like yours exists is awesome, because there is, in a lot of ways, a stigma around what goes on over there. But I'm glad to see that it doesn't spill over into the world of pure research and education, which is what you guys are trying to do. It's it's not about any kind of indoctrination. It's just about pure education with the research on these weapons. And I'm delighted that it is very well received, and that you guys have been doing so well with it.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. From the whole team, and it is a team effort. It's not me at the helm kind of thing. We have a whole team of guys and primary researchers, and Arabs and Israelis and everyone, Afghans, and everyone who's working together on this kind of stuff, and people who see what we're interested in, and they sort of come out of the woodwork, and we attract people who are into it, kind of deal. But yeah,
right. So there's one term that I think we should address, because I'm sure it's probably a pet peeve of yours, but there's a lot of people that talk about these Khyber Pass guns, and they assume that they are these incredibly crudely made, often unsafe types of firearms that come out of that region in general, and they all kind of get lumped together as this junk that they call Khyber Pass guns. Do you want to touch on that and kind of put that misnomer to rest?
So yeah. So first of all, I'm sort of on a personal crusade to get that term like revoked from the English language.
Uh-huh.
Primarily because the term the Khyber Pass is really just refers to a single a mountainous valley between Afghanistan and Pakistan that starts at the Torkham border crossing in Pakistan, and then goes over there. And it's annoying to me because it's like all these guns come from the province, the region of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which was previously known as the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan. And it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like, dude, like give credit where credit's due, man. Like they come out of villages like Dara and Khel and some other villages around there, and they come from this province. It's like I'd rather the credit go towards the province that they come from, the areas that they come from, instead of this weird misnomer of Khyber Pass. So that's where that comes from. But the guns from this region are so they're the sort of personification of Silah Report, because they are so fascinating and intricately linked to everything else happening. They've got like all the check boxes, right? They're indigenously produced or assembled. They have historical connection. They've been going on for over 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
They've existed for that time. They are still being churned out today. They are intricately weaved in with the history of the region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the English presence there as well, and then the American presence in the 2000s, and then the Soviet presence in the 1980s, and then all this stuff going in between. And they're just so fascinating to study for a variety of reasons. And I mean, originally, the cottage industry that became what is now the gun making industries in Dar Adam Khel and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and outside of Peshawar today began 100 years ago, when the British really started instituting some very strict gun control. And what's cool about this is that it doesn't happen then either. Like the tradition of gun making and the tradition of firearms assembly and craft production, goes back to the 1800s, where you have the assembly and production of flintlocks and matchlocks and percussion rifles, as the various other powers are fighting and stuff like that. And you go back to 1840, 1841 of the First Anglo-Afghan War, where the British were chased out of Kabul and slaughtered almost to a man. And you actually have a really competent Afghan force made up of Tajiks and Pashtun tribes that were able to rout this British force, and the superiority of their muskets at the time is undeniable. I mean, we have British accounts of, picking out officers, of being shot at from over 300 meters. It was successful and accurate small arms fire. You have this tradition of, marksmanship that goes back into then. And
Right.
whether or not, and here's the thing is that and this is what comes with all these misconceptions. And you see like Pashtun tribesmen are like super, like they're great marksmen. They even they even exist to today. It's like I'll debate that. And it's like, yeah, there's some good Pashtun marksmen today. Like there's good Taliban sharpshooters who are fighting in Afghanistan. And there's also a lot that suck. It's like there isn't this, and this goes into the whole history of the region too. And that, I always hear that from, Americans and folks who it's like the biggest cop out argument I hear of, well, we should just pull out of the region. Like they've been fighting for like thousands of years, and there's nothing we can do to end that. And it's like, dude, that's the dumbest cop out argument I've ever seen. It's like, well, first of all that history of fighting, this isn't generational. It's like, dad goes to war and he's a fantastic warrior, and then he comes back and he births me. And it's like, well, that like his ability to fight well doesn't like stay in the genome and like correspond to me. It's like, no, I may be a horrible fighter and I may not know what to do. No, that's not generational. And then second of all, it's like that's just a genuine lack of ignorance about the region. In that, like, no, there hasn't been thousands of years of fighting. There's been periods that are intricately mixed up, and there's been periods of war, and there's been periods of peace, just like anywhere else. And it's like to say that like everyone's been fighting for thousands of years, like that's just a cop out, man. It's like I can point to like years and decades and millennia that like there actually hasn't been any fighting in the region. It's been pretty small. So you have this whole history mixed up in everything, right? And then you have the guns that are part of this history. And so you have this, tradition of, gun making and craft assembly and craft production from the 1800s. You even have it into, 1840s, First Anglo-Afghan War, and then you have it continuing. And then, but things really start ramping up, especially in, the Raj-controlled areas of Pakistan, the British-controlled areas and the federally administered tribal areas, or the Northwestern Frontier Front. With a lot of the Pashtun and Afridi tribes that are there. And you have this British attempt at gun control, at wanting to, outlaw firearms. So a lot of the Pashtun tribesmen were like, well, we're going to start making our own. And what's fascinating is that like everyone puts this spin on the Khyber Pass copies, right? And they're like, well, they're just copying guns made in the Europe or the United States. And it's like they are, but the difference is locally it's so okay. So this is the sort getting into sort of anthropology. You have the emic and the etic perspective of, what is the local perspective on this thing and what is the outside perspective on this thing. And well, the outside perspective, looking at from the inside in, is like, okay, well, they're just copying these guns like one-to-one replicas down to the markings and stuff. And well, in the United States and in Europe, the point of a copy is to fool, right? The point of a copy is to gyp someone into spending a bunch of money on this thing that they otherwise wouldn't spend on it. However, the indigenous perspective on this, the reason why a lot of these Khyber Pakhtunkhwa makers are building these guns is because the Pashtuns and the people who are buying them, they're not buying them because they're not buying them because they want a real Martini Henry, and they're being gypped with this fake Martini Henry. No, they're buying them because they can't afford the real Martini Henry, and they want the next best thing, which is a really close copy of a Martini Henry, and that's why they're buying them. They're not. There's no going on here. Like the guys who are churning these guns out and selling them in the markets, it's like there's no like there's a clear distinction. It's like this is the Darai version, which Darai is short for the Dar Adam Khel, and if you add an E on the end of that, in Pashto or Dari, it's adding like, well, this is this is the connotation for this comes from that region kind of thing. Kandahari, if you're a person from Kandahar, Kabuli, if you're a person from Kabul. is an example in Pashto, or Dari. And if you're like, for the buyers who are buying this stuff, it's like, well, this is the .ie version, and then this is the real version. The real version is, 2 times the amount of the .ie version. Which one are you going to buy? Well, I don't have enough money to buy the real version. I'm going to buy the .ie version. And, the very clear distinction among a lot of shooters and collectors in the region, especially like the hardcore Pakistani collectors. A lot of people who come from Islamabad or Peshawar, and they'll make a very clear distinction. It's like, no. I do not own any .ie guns. In fact, my whole collection is the real deal. These are real AKs. These are real Martini Henrys. These are real either Russian or Chinese Kalashnikovs.
Right.
They're the real thing. They're not the .ie version. I don't buy the .ie version. And that's an important distinction to be made, whereas we're looking at it oftentimes from the outside in, and we're like, well, what are they doing with all these copies? Why are they making all these fakes?
Right.
And it's like, not a fake. It's, you can't afford the real one. So you get the next best thing, which is as close as you can get to the real one without, shelling out for the insane price for it.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting and important distinction to make, talking about being able to afford things. And, like you said, there are collectors over there that are making distinctions, no, these are genuine or these are not. But, when you're looking at people who are purchasing, the Martini Henry, or even, and they're making copies of Glocks and M4s and stuff over there, they're buying what they can afford. And it's not necessarily because they're putting it in their collection. These people are using these guns to defend their lives in some instances. And that goes back, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, to putting to bed the misconception that all of the guns over there that they're making are crap. Sure, as with everything in any industry, you've got some people that are making things of questionable quality. But the fact of the matter is that these people are turning out guns that their lives are depending on them. So, why would you willingly put out a junk product if you know that people are depending on them? You're certainly not going to have any kind of repeat business or recommendations if you're making a junk gun that someone is coming to buy from you. So, am I on the right track in that area?
Yeah, exactly. And people, no one's gonna buy junk, right? And that like junk is junk anywhere in the world. Like no,
right.
Like that's like everyone realizes junk for junk. It's like people aren't
right. It's a universal.
Exactly. So, and even with that, like the caveat, like people will still buy the .ie stuff, and they'll be like, okay, I'm buying it, I have it. I realize it's only going to work for a couple magazines, and I bought it with the intent knowing it's only going to work for a couple magazines, and the seller was like, yeah, it's only going to work for a couple magazines. So it's
right.
like, it's all in that circle of, yes, I can't afford a Russian AK, but I can get something that looks exactly like a Russian AK, but it isn't. And yeah, it will defend me when I need it, but I don't plan on fighting a war with this thing. It's like, if I'm going to fight a thing, I'm going to get the real deal, kind of thing. And that's something, like, let me tell you, like, something crazy. And this is the extent is, sort of market dynamics and stuff in the region, is that with AKs, they do this thing. The .ie makers from Dara are making these contraptions where they're actually taking a milled receiver AK and they're making it look like a stamped receiver on the outside.
That's so cool.
So it's a milled receiver, right? It starts out as a solid chunk of steel, but then when they mill it out, they do things like carve out, fake pivot pins and fake, like, the dimple on an AK, on a stamped AK, the dimple, but the magazine dimple.
Yeah.
They'll cut that out. So it'll look exactly like a stamped gun, but it's not a stamped gun. It's a milled gun. And the reason why is because there's a customer demand, right? Just like in the US, like for like, I don't know, freaking like, the pistol braces or
just look at the entire line of retro guns that have come out here in the States.
Yeah, no, exactly. So That's actually the retro gun comparison is actually a perfect comparison for the Dara stuff, because that's the same reason why you buy a retro gun in the US. You can't afford an original like select fire AR-10, from the 1950s because it's $60,000. Thank you. Right.
Right.
But you can afford, I don't know, the $800 Brownells AR-10, right? So that's
right.
like a good example there. But like with these stamped things, it's like the customers, they know that the milled AKs are fantastic because they're going to hold up longer under pressure. Right? However, they want the look of the
Sure.
the original Russian AKMs, of the kind that flood that came into the country that the Afghan army was using in the 1980s, and a lot of them got captured and then brought back into Pakistan in the 1980s. They want that slick black look of a stamped Russian AK kind of thing.
Right.
But guess what? They can't buy one because those are really expensive, because the supply and demand, man, they're like freaking
Sure.
$4,000, $5,000 at this point. They're a lot of money. But they can get one of those for a cheaper amount. So it's like, that's just an example of that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's another one of those universal things. People buying what they can afford, whether it's over there or over here.
No, for real. I mean, and then if we look at, if you want to look at the actual combatant forces, at what are the people who are actually fighting each other, right? What are they actually using? If you look at the Taliban in Afghanistan, or you look at the TTP, the Taliban party in Pakistan, you look at the actual combatants who are actually engaging in fighting and stuff. They're not using the Dara stuff. They're using, like, the Taliban. They love to use captured American surplus American arms that were supplied to the Afghan army. They love using that. They love using captured stuff from the Afghan army. They're buying that kind of thing. They're buying the OG. They're buying and they're using the original stuff. They're not using the stuff in combat in Afghanistan. And the same sort of Afghan National Army and the Afghan militia groups and the Afghan police. It's like they're not using the Dara stuff. They're using the real deal. That's an important distinction to be made there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's pivot here for a minute. You mentioned it briefly earlier, but you do have a new book out, and it's called Into Helmand with the Walking Dead, a story of Marine Corps combat in Afghanistan. And I haven't got my copy yet. I'm going to be getting a copy here, but I am so excited that this book is out now. Let's delve into a little bit of a history lesson here. Who are the Walking Dead? Where does that nickname come from with the Marine Corps?
The Walking Dead is a moniker that came out of Vietnam for the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. And 19 had been around before Vietnam. 19 had been around, I think was activated in like the First World War and fought in the Second World War in Korea. But it was Vietnam where 19 got its name. And that's actually a fascinating point, because there are several different stories. They're pretty much folklore. I'm not going to don't pin my name on this is where like, if you want to find out the real source of the name, like, go do your own research and like figure that out and then tell me.
Right.
I'd like to know, and everything. But the popular conception and folklore on it is that there was an engagement in which the battalion was involved with an NVA unit, and one of the North Vietnamese generals, one of their sons was involved in there as an officer, and he was killed in that engagement. And as sort of retribution for that, Hanoi Hana, who was like the English language radio station in Vietnam, North Vietnam, came out with an announcement that said, "Hey, all you Marines and sailors in the first of the 9th Battalion, the first of the 9th Regiment, you guys are nothing but walking dead from here on out. Like, you're alive now, but you're all going to be dead because we're just going to wipe you guys out." So that's one thing that happened, and then there's another thing. I believe it was when 19 came ashore in Vietnam. There's something where they greeted the Marines and sailors of 19. It's like, "Hey guys, welcome to Vietnam. You're nothing but walking dead," kind of thing. And the phrase in Vietnamese is actually "Depo Chet," And it's actually kind of neat because we got commemorative Kimber 1911s on my second deployment with Depot Chet on the side, on the slide of the Kimber with Kimber
cool.
Department. And it's funny because, and I mentioned this before, but my uncle was in Vietnam as a CORDS advisor, which was a military-civilian partnership. And he actually married his translator. And now,
wow.
So I have this like half Vietnamese part of my family. And I asked my aunt, and I was like, "Hey, Hua, what is have you ever heard Depot Chet in Vietnamese?" And she looked at me and she was like, "Depot Chet." It's like, "Oh, you don't want to be called that, man. That means like you're a ghost, like you're alive, but you're not, like, and you're walking." And I was like,
right.
"Oh, maybe I shouldn't tell you that."
Right.
That's my battalion's moniker, right? So,
right.
Either way, so regardless of the name, right? Either way, that was how the name happened, but that was separate from we took on this huge casualty rate in Vietnam. I mean, according to some statistics, and this is again folklore, like I don't actually have the Marine Corps like battalion by battalion statistical rate from Vietnam in front of me. But according to some statistics, the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines took the highest amount of casualties in Vietnam as compared to any other Marine battalion. And that was that is very legitimate in terms of the high casualty rate. I don't know if it was the highest or not, but there was a legitimate joke in Vietnam. I've met Vietnam vets who have told me like, "Oh man, like 19, that was the battalion. Like we make jokes like, oh, you're going to the Walking Dead. Like here's your check. You're going to get your check-in papers and a Purple Heart when you go there, because it's like you're eventually going to be either killed or wounded. It's just a matter of time." And fascinatingly enough, I was reading an account of Khe Sanh by the famous. There's a Vietnamese. There's a journalist who wrote, and he was at Khe Sanh, and I forget the name of the book, but he was a really famous journalist, and in his account he writes of Marines at Khe Sanh saying, "Man, like it sucks being at Khe Sanh, but it sucks even more being with 19, because they were out like in a patrol base off of Khe Sanh." So it's like you think of Khe Sanh as this really historic, like, really horrible battle that the Marines were in, and it's like the Khe Sanh Marines were like, "Dude, it sucks being here, but it sucks even more being with 19 that's out there in the boonies," kind of thing. So it's like that's put things in perspective, right? But that's just sort of a summary of where The Walking Dead came from.
Yeah. There was a volunteer at the NRA Museum when I worked there who was in Vietnam, and he was actually in 19. And he's got some interesting stories. And not long before I left the museum, he gave me one of their challenge coins, which is really cool. It's got an honored place here on my desk.
Wow. I don't even have a 19 challenge coin.
Well, you can't have mine. So it's a very interesting history to the unit. But it begs the question, why this book?
I started it in 2013 on my second deployment, and I started writing it then. And I just kept on adding stuff to it as I went to college. And I hooked up with one of my buddies named Kevin Schranz, who was in Ohio. And he sort of tangentially parallel to me, he was interested in writing a similar book about his experiences in 19. And especially, he was really interested in writing about the patrol base he was at, Patrol Base Boldak, which was in 2013 to 14, a patrol base outside of Camp Leatherneck that his company was at, Charlie 19. By that time, we were in Charlie 19 together, and I left to go to Bravo 19, which is where I was at in 2013. And he was, we contacted on Facebook. We were interested in this stuff. And, he was really fascinated by writing about this. And later on, almost a couple months later, he actually killed himself in September of 2015. And it was at that point, like I got with his wife and I was like, "Hey, do you want to publish some of Schranz's writings with the book that I have?" And she was interested in that. So she actually submitted
20 pages of what he had written, and we incorporated it into the book that we have today, where really it has, it's the first part of the book, the last part, and then the chapter that talks about that second deployment. It incorporates Kevin's writings in there. So it's really, I really co-authored this with Kevin. And it's also a way for us to honor Kevin as well. And for Abby, that's his surviving widow. And she was really pleased by how it turned out too. So that was really more important to really help Abby along with this kind of thing and really get Kevin's name out there in that space.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, that's great. I mean, it's a story that needs to be told, and I think it's a perspective that we don't have enough of, particularly on this most modern of conflicts that we're in. And I really think it's great that you were able to work in some of Kevin's writings and honor him with that, because it helps bring to light a lot of the inner demons and the struggles that some of the guys went over there came back with that we don't give enough due to. So I'm pleased that you were able to incorporate it, and I'm sure his widow's very happy as well. Looking forward to reading the book.
Well, we're looking forward to getting it sent out to you, man, for sure.
Absolutely. So let's pivot back to guns here. Let's wrap things up with the most important and pressing question that you will get asked in this entire interview.
Oh man, what's your favorite gun?
Close. What arms designer, past or present, would you want to meet and why?
Oh dang, man!
Right. See, we're getting deep here, man. Getting real deep.
Dude, that caught me out of left field. Man,
it's not anywhere near as easy as what's your favorite gun.
Yeah. That's not. Yeah. You got the questions for sure, man.
See, I told you, hard hitting, man. This is real journalism.
Yeah. Do you know the gun, like the designs that I'm more, I think of Ferguson. I like that, just like boom, like projectile vomit. Ferguson right there. Patrick Ferguson, who designed, the Ferguson
screw breech.
Yeah. Oh man. And here, this is the thing, like, as I think as we study small arms more and more, it's not the successful designs that I'm fascinated by. It's the designs that didn't make it that I'm fascinated by. Because, the more you study these things and the more you see the differences between, why one design was more successful than another. And it's like, you really get into the weeds on this stuff. And it's like, you really find out the more fascinating parts of these stories are really the points of, and are those moments where you realize, why one design beat another one out really almost came down to like a flip of the coin, and just came down to like politics and metallurgy and, specifics and egos and stuff like that. And
sure.
And like that, to me, like that is the more interesting aspect of small arms, of the history of small arms design, not the successes. Like, I don't know. It's almost like I want to say, like, who cares about the successes? It's like they were successful. It's like everything is explained, right? Everything falls into place. And M1, and Grand had his thing, and he submitted it, and Springfield Armory dug it, and boom, boom, boom. And it was the best, semi-automatic rifle, World War II, happy days, like, cool, okay. Like, but what
how did we get there?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why did it happen? And it's like the failures along that are more interesting. And I mean, if we look at stuff like the M14, it's like that abortion of a rifle that should never have been adopted. It's like, and it comes down to like stupid egos at Springfield Armory and whatever that guy was, Studebaker or something. But I think Ferguson is, and for me, it's like when I look at small arms designs they are so far forward. They're so far forward with their thinking and, their design. And it's like the Hall rifle. And it's like, dude, It's like, man, you had everything. you had everything here. It was an amazing design. It's like you had it going. You had a successful breech loading design in, out of Harper's Ferry in the 18 teens or whatever, or 1820s,
Yeah, John Hall's one of my heroes.
Yeah, exactly. And with Ferguson, it was like, dude, you had a technology. Well, okay, well, first of all, it wasn't Ferguson's technology. The idea of, a breech loading screw open rifle, it's like that had exist. We have examples of breech loaders from the 1500s. We have King Henry, he used to hunt, and his bodyguards had breech loaders, and the idea of a breech loader was there, and the idea of the screw open, it was there. Ferguson did not reinvent the wheel. He wasn't this technological genius that came up with the screw open, the screw open breech loader overnight. It's like, no, that existed. It existed in hunting technology. It existed in, the late 1600s and the early 1700s. It was a thing. There's a lot of French designs that went over it. The difference was the genius that Ferguson was that Ferguson saw the potential in, he not only, because it's one thing to see a potential, but it's another thing to actually utilize it, right? I mean, we all see the potential of plasma rifles, okay? Like, okay, but when are we going to get plasma rifles phased in, to the infantry? It's like, that's a big leap right there.
Right.
So, but Ferguson both at once saw the potential and he used it in his unit of whatever, the green. They wore that green uniform. And the thing with Ferguson is like he was up against all these egos in the British Army that were like, no, like you can't use it. Like this is like, you can't do this. You can't make precision, well-aimed shots from a concealed position on the enemy. It's like how you can't do that. It's like you have to get up in this stupid red line and march towards the enemy. And Ferguson was like, no, dude, we can be a lot more effective doing this other thing. So I think Ferguson would be just a designer that I would really want to meet.
Absolutely.
In that way. And he was killed at the Battle of Green Mountain in whatever, North or South Carolina. And it's like, dude, and his whole concept just died with him when he was killed in battle. And it's like, dude, you had something so like phenomenal in small arms design, but more implementation, because it was more his vision of implementing this technology that worked out better. So I don't know. I think that's someone who I'd really want to meet, like Patrick Ferguson. I'd want to just ask him, like, dude, what were like those ego battles that you were going through and stuff like that. And I don't know. So it's the failures that are more interesting to me than the successes. The success is laid bare and open. Everyone knows why something is successful, but people don't know why something failed, right?
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, and that's, we often look at stuff, with the benefit of hindsight, and we look at some of these design ideas and we go, well, yeah, of course that didn't work. They didn't take into consideration X, Y, or Z and why, and that's why it failed, but they don't know that at the time. You don't know unless you try, and Ferguson didn't know. So he tried, and that, there are a lot of designs that never made it off paper, and he was fortunate enough, to certainly get it off paper. But, like you said, his untimely death led to the demise of the concept, and it's one of the many what ifs and what could have been. But it allows us to look at, nothing exists in a vacuum, and all of these arms designers are standing on the shoulders of the generations that came before them. And it's important to note that they're standing on the shoulders of those who succeeded and those who failed. Yeah. Because there's that great line. It's like, sometimes your life is the purpose of your life is to be that lighthouse to guide other people away from the rocks that you ran into so that they don't run into them themselves.
That's good.
And that's what you can learn from the failures, and it all benefits. You benefit just as much, if not more, from that as you do from the successes. And Ferguson is a great example of that. So I love that that's who you chose. And spoiler alert, that's also who Jonathan Ferguson chose.
Oh man, That's not. Oh man, that's like two guys in a row.
Yep, exactly. And that's so, and unfortunately he made sure to point out, unfortunately, Jonathan Ferguson is no relation to Patrick, much to his chagrin. But
Yeah.
so you're in good company. Patrick Ferguson's well represented here. So that's cool. I'm glad you chose him. He is an underrepresented person in the arms design community, and I wish his name was better known.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, man.
Awesome. Well, Miles, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. We've covered a lot of ground here, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But as always, we've barely scratched the surface. I know that you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours, and come nowhere near the end of what we're trying to discuss. But alas, all good things must come to an end. And I really appreciate you being here, and hopefully we can have you back sometime. We can steal some more of your time, and we can have you on here again. But Miles, thank you so much.
Thank you, man. It was a pleasure and an honor to be on here, and this has been really fantastic.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Again, that was Miles Vining with Silah Report. If you're interested in learning more about the work being done by Miles and the rest of the crew over at Silah Report, you can visit them at silahreport.com. There will be a link to their website in the description below. I really appreciate you tuning in to this episode. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed on your favorite platform and share this with someone that you think might like it. Thanks for everything. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I'll talk to you again real soon.